Alex had been dreaming of this weekend for months. After relentless weeks at the office, juggling meetings and deadlines, the idea of escaping to a secluded cabin in the woods felt like a promise of sanity. Nestled near a shimmering lake, surrounded by dense pine trees and the murmur of nature, the cabin seemed almost too perfect. The air smelled of fresh pine and damp earth, the kind of scent that made one forget the constant buzz of city life. Alex parked the car, dragging a small suitcase across the gravel path toward the front porch, and paused for a moment, letting the stillness sink in. For the first time in what felt like years, there was no pressing email, no ringing phone, no ticking clock, just quiet, stretching out endlessly. Unpacking was meditative. Each item Alex placed in the cabin felt like reclaiming a piece of freedom. The wooden beams above gave the place character, the fireplace promised cozy nights, and the balcony offered a perfect vantage point to watch the sun dip behind the trees. Everything seemed serene, almost storybook-like. Alex could already imagine sitting out here in the mornings with a cup of coffee, the lake mist curling in the sunrise, and the hours stretching like soft taffy. But the calm was deceptive. From the moment Alex drove up the winding road to the cabin, there had been subtle signs that the peace might not be uncontested. A small sign at the entrance read, "Private property, HOA rules enforced." It was nothing alarming, but Alex's city instincts flinched just slightly. HOA rules were usually mundane, but every so often they came with drama. Alex shrugged it off, locking the car and heading toward the cabin. It was late afternoon when the first knock came. A woman, impeccably dressed in a crisp white blouse and tailored slacks, stood at the edge of the driveway. She exuded an aura of authority mixed with a hint of something sharper, an intensity that made Alex instinctively tense. "Good afternoon," the woman said, her voice sweet but edged. "I'm Mrs. Hamilton from the Homeowners Association." "Welcome to the neighborhood," Alex offered a polite smile, extending a hand. "Thank you. I'm Alex. I'm just here for the weekend, trying to get away from the city." Mrs. Hamilton's eyes scanned the cabin with a critical, almost predatory precision. Yes, I've heard of your booking. But I must remind you, our HOA has strict guidelines about property usage and guest limits." Alex raised an eyebrow. "Guest limits?" "Of course," she said, lips tightening into a thin line. "We take these matters very seriously. It's for the safety, the aesthetic, the harmony of the neighborhood." She gave a tight-lipped smile, then added, "I trust you understand." Alex nodded politely, masking the creeping irritation. A good neighbor conversation seemed harmless enough. But there was something in the way she said it that hinted this wasn't mere courtesy. As the afternoon turned into evening, Alex unpacked the rest of the cabin, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. The forest seemed almost too quiet, like the kind of silence that carried secrets. Birds chirped occasionally, but there was a sense of anticipation in the air, a subtle tension that made Alex glance toward the driveway more than once. Then came the phone call. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. Alex answered, expecting a delivery confirmation or a nearby friend trying to locate the cabin. Instead, Mrs. Hamilton's voice came through sharp and deliberate. "Alex, I need to speak with you immediately," she said. "Your cabin is only allowed to host 10 guests at a time. I've heard rumors that you've reserved it for 100. You must comply, or I will have no choice but to involve the full HOA board." Alex blinked. 100 guests? That was impossible. The cabin was tiny, a cozy 2-bedroom retreat, hardly the venue for a crowd of that size. Alex laughed nervously. "I think there's been some kind of mistake." "I don't even have that many people coming." Mrs. Hamilton's tone didn't waver. "Mistake or not, it's my responsibility to enforce the rules. You need to take immediate action to prevent any violations. The HOA is watching, Alex. I strongly suggest you cooperate." The call ended abruptly, leaving Alex staring at the phone in disbelief. 100 guests watching? The tension that had been a whisper in the back of the mind now grew louder. There was something obsessive about Mrs. Hamilton, a sense that this wasn't just about rules, it was about control. Alex sat on the edge of the bed, hands gripping the sheets. This was supposed to be a weekend of peace, of disconnecting. And yet suddenly the quiet cabin felt like a stage, and Alex had just been thrust into a conflict that wasn't of their making. The forest outside no longer seemed welcoming. It seemed watchful. Every rustle of leaves felt like an echo of Mrs. Hamilton's warnings. And then Alex realized the weekend wasn't going to be simple. It was going to be a battle of patience, wit, and composure. Mrs. Hamilton's intrusion had set the stage, and Alex had no choice but to step onto it. The serene getaway had transformed into something else entirely, a suspenseful game where boundaries, rules, and courage would collide. The first night fell with a restless tension. The lake reflected the moonlight perfectly, but Alex couldn't stop glancing at the driveway, half expecting to see Mrs. Hamilton's silhouette appearing at the gate. Sleep would not come easily, because the weekend that promised peace was now shadowed by a looming confrontation. And Alex knew deep down that this weekend would change everything about how they viewed their quiet little retreat. The morning sun filtered through the pine trees, casting golden streaks across the cabin floor, but Alex couldn't appreciate it. The previous night's phone call lingered like a shadow. Mrs. Hamilton's words replayed over and over, her stern insistence that the cabin was only allowed for 10 guests, gnawing at Alex's nerves. The cabin that had promised refuge now felt like a trap. Alex tried to shake off the unease, brewing coffee and glancing at the lake outside the window. The water sparkled, birds flitted from branch to branch, and yet the sense of being watched persisted. It wasn't just Mrs. Hamilton's call. It was the knowledge that she had a network, a group of neighbors who shared her obsession with rules and appearances. In Alex's mind, the idyllic weekend was already under siege. Breakfast passed in silence, the aroma of fresh coffee filling the cabin, mingling with tension. Alex's friends, Jamie and Riley, had arrived early that morning, chatting happily about the weekend plans. They had come to hike, fish, and unwind, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beyond the cabin gate. Alex hesitated before speaking. "Guys, there's something weird. The HOA, this woman, Mrs. Hamilton," she called last night, "claims I've booked the cabin for 100 guests," Alex said, trying to keep the tone light. Jamie choked on a sip of coffee, eyes widening. 100 guests here? There's no way that's true." "I know," Alex replied, running a hand through their hair. The cabin barely fits 4 comfortably. "I think she's exaggerating, but..." She sounded serious. "Like she was going to take some kind of action." Riley frowned, leaning against the counter. "You mean like fines? Or calling in some HOA enforcement?" Alex nodded, feeling the weight of the weekend collapsing. "Exactly. She said she'd involve the full board if I didn't comply." The friends exchanged glances, the tension rising. What had been meant as a peaceful retreat now felt like a pressure cooker. They decided to ignore Mrs. Hamilton for the moment and focus on settling in. But every creak of the cabin and rustle of leaves outside carried the possibility of intrusion. By mid-morning, the first tangible sign of Mrs. Hamilton's aggression arrived. A letter slid under the cabin door. Alex opened it carefully, expecting formal language. Instead, the letter was a mixture of bureaucratic jargon and passive-aggressive admonitions. It emphasized community safety, guest limits, and potential penalties, ending with a pointed note: "Immediate compliance is expected. Consider this a courtesy warning." Alex's hands trembled slightly as they read the words aloud to Jamie and Riley. "It's like she's trying to scare me into obedience." Jamie, always the practical one, leaned over the letter. "Well, let's see what the actual HOA rules say. If she's wrong, you have documentation." Alex nodded, opening a laptop and pulling up the HOA's official guidelines. Hours passed as they combed through pages of bylaws, restrictions, and small print clauses. It became clear that Mrs. Hamilton's claims were not just exaggerated, they were impossible. The cabin's booking was perfectly legal, and the guest limits she referenced didn't exist anywhere in the official documents. The realization brought relief, but it didn't erase the creeping anxiety. Mrs. Hamilton's persistence suggested that she wasn't merely enforcing rules. She was seeking confrontation. Every notification, call, and letter felt like a tightening grip, a subtle attempt to intimidate Alex and assert control over the weekend that was supposed to belong to them. By late afternoon, Alex and his friends had decided to take a break by the lake. The air was crisp, the water calm, and for a few minutes, they felt the weekend's intended serenity. But even as they cast lines for fishing, a tension hovered. Alex kept glancing toward the driveway, imagining Mrs. Hamilton appearing with some formal document or accusatory stare. Sure enough, as the sun dipped lower, another call came. Mrs. Hamilton's voice was sharper this time, almost triumphant. "Alex, I've been informed that additional guests have arrived," she said, as if reading from a prepared script. "You are in direct violation of HOA regulations. If I must, I will come to the cabin personally to ensure compliance." Alex's chest tightened. "There's no violation. Only 3 of us are here. Excuses will not be tolerated," she snapped. "I suggest you act immediately. Consider this your final warning before official action." The call ended abruptly, leaving Alex staring at the phone. The threat wasn't just theoretical anymore, it felt imminent. Each message, each letter, each call was a calculated escalation, and the tension had shifted from anxiety to anger. The intrusion wasn't about rules. It was about control, and Mrs. Hamilton had clearly decided that Alex would be her next target. Back at the cabin, Alex paced the floor, thinking. Friends watched quietly, sensing the mounting stress. "We can't just let her bully us," Alex said finally, a steely edge to their voice. "We need a plan," Jamie nodded. "Exactly. We document everything, know the rules, and don't give her any reason to escalate further," Riley added. "And maybe be ready for when she shows up, because I have a feeling she will." Even as night fell and the first stars appeared over the forest canopy, Alex felt the weight of the looming confrontation. The peaceful getaway had turned into a psychological battlefield. Mrs. Hamilton's obsession with control had cast a long shadow over the weekend, and Alex realized this was no longer just about personal relaxation. It was about standing ground, protecting boundaries and maintaining calm in the face of escalating intimidation. The cabin, once a sanctuary, had become a stage for tension, suspense, and strategy. Alex knew that every choice over the next hours could define the weekend, and perhaps teach a broader lesson about courage, composure, and cleverness in the face of relentless authority. The next morning, Alex woke with a renewed sense of purpose. The previous day had left them restless, cycling between anxiety and anger, but now clarity had set in. Mrs. Hamilton's threats weren't grounded in fact. They were purely about exerting control. The cabin was legal, the booking was valid, and yet she had insisted that Alex was planning to host 100 guests. It was absurd. And Alex knew that any response rooted in fear would only empower her. Over breakfast, Alex laid out the plan to Jamie and Riley. "We're not letting her intimidate us," Alex said firmly, voice steady. "But we also need to be smart. Documentation, rules, and boundaries, those are our weapons." Jamie nodded, pointing to the stack of HOA guidelines Alex had printed out. "We have everything we need to prove she's wrong. Let's make sure it's organized and accessible," Riley added. "And maybe we should control access to the property. If she shows up unannounced again, we can prevent unnecessary confrontation without breaking any laws." Alex considered this. The cabin had a small gate leading to the driveway, one that could be secured without violating any property rights. It wasn't about locking out Mrs. Hamilton personally. It was about protecting their peace and ensuring that no one could intrude under pretenses. After breakfast, Alex went to the gate with a determination that surprised even them. The lock clicked into place with a sense of finality. It was more than a physical barrier. It was a psychological statement. "This weekend belongs to us," Alex said quietly, almost to themselves, "and no one has the right to take it away with lies." The afternoon passed in an uneasy calm. Jamie and Riley explored the surrounding trails while Alex stayed at the cabin, monitoring emails and messages. Sure enough, the first reaction from Mrs. Hamilton came within an hour. A text appeared on Alex's phone. "Locking the gate will not prevent the HOA from taking action. You are escalating this unnecessarily." Alex read the message aloud. "She really thinks this will intimidate me," Alex said, a faint smile breaking through. "It won't. It's just protecting our space." Another message followed quickly, more aggressive in tone. "I will be there this evening to ensure compliance. You cannot avoid this." Alex's pulse quickened, but this time with resolve rather than panic. The stakes were higher, but so was the opportunity to show that courage and cleverness could counter manipulation. They reviewed the HOA rules again, ensuring that every action they took was defensible. Every letter, every message, every locked gate was grounded in fact and legality. By late afternoon, the tension became almost unbearable. The forest outside seemed to whisper, leaves rustling in a breeze that carried a sense of anticipation. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that Mrs. Hamilton was watching, planning, waiting for any sign of weakness. But instead of retreating, Alex prepared to confront the challenge head-on. When Jamie and Riley returned from the trail, Alex outlined the next steps. "We're documenting everything, messages, calls, and any attempt she makes to overstep. If she comes here personally, we stay calm, record, and present facts, not emotions." Riley frowned. "You're saying we let her see the gate, but we don't open it for her?" "Exactly," Alex replied. "She wants a reaction. If we give her one, she wins. The gate is our boundary. It's visible, legal, and it makes a statement without escalation." Evening descended, and the first shadowed shapes of the trees stretched across the driveway. The air carried a chill, but the tension inside the cabin was hotter than any summer sun. A sudden knock startled them. Alex's heart pounded, but they approached the door calmly. It wasn't a knock for entry. It was Mrs. Hamilton testing the limits. Alex opened the door just enough to speak. "Good evening, Mrs. Hamilton. I see you've come to check on our compliance." Mrs. Hamilton's eyes narrowed, and she exhaled sharply. "I will not tolerate disobedience. The HOA has rules, and you are in violation." Alex gestured toward the locked gate. "We're following the rules. The cabin is reserved legally, and we're ensuring safety and compliance. You are welcome to observe from here, but the property is private." Mrs. Hamilton's lips pressed into a thin line. She glared, visibly frustrated that Alex had not reacted with panic or submission. After a tense moment, she turned on her heel and muttered something about involving the board, retreating from the driveway. Inside the cabin, the three friends exhaled collectively. The gate had held. Alex felt a surge of satisfaction and empowerment. It wasn't a victory in the conventional sense, but it was the first moment of reclaiming control over the weekend. The tension had been escalated, yes, but in their favor. That night, as the wind whispered through the pine trees, Alex sat on the balcony reflecting. The locked gate wasn't just about the cabin. It was a metaphor for standing one's ground, for protecting personal boundaries without resorting to aggression. Mrs. Hamilton had tried to dominate, to intimidate, but Alex had responded with composure, legality, and strategic thinking. Sleep came easier that night, though still with a lingering sense of anticipation. Alex knew the weekend wasn't over, and Mrs. Hamilton's obsession would likely continue. But the balance had shifted. The cabin was no longer merely a retreat, it was a statement. A declaration that peace and autonomy could not be usurped by exaggeration or manipulation. And somewhere in the quiet of the forest, Alex felt a thrill of something deeper, the satisfaction of clever resistance, the quiet triumph of setting boundaries, and the awareness that the weekend, once threatened, was now firmly under their control. The game was only beginning, but Alex was ready. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, a thin mist rolling over the lake and curling between the trees. The weather mirrored Alex's unease. After yesterday's events with the locked gate, there was no question that Mrs. Hamilton would escalate. Every sense told Alex that today would be the true test of composure and strategy. Breakfast was quiet. Jamie and Riley exchanged worried glances, but Alex had made a point of speaking calmly. "She's predictable," Alex said, pouring coffee into 3 mugs. "We've documented everything. We know the rules. Today, it's just a matter of staying firm." The words were meant to reassure the friends, but Alex felt the knot in their stomach tighten anyway. The cabin, the lake, the trees, all of it had been a refuge. But that refuge had been invaded by someone whose obsession with control seemed limitless. By late morning, the knock came. Louder this time, deliberate and echoing across the driveway. Alex approached the door cautiously and peeked through the window. There she was, Mrs. Hamilton, hands on hips, sunglasses perched on her sharp nose, lips pursed like a clenched fist. She radiated confidence, but Alex noticed the slight tremor in her posture, a subtle hint that her authority depended on others' compliance. Alex opened the door halfway, leaving the gate firmly locked behind. "Good morning, Mrs. Hamilton. You seem early today." Mrs. Hamilton's eyes flickered and her voice took on a cutting tone. "Alex, I've come to ensure that you understand the severity of your actions. Locking the gate, ignoring HOA communications, this is not acceptable. You're undermining the association and disrespecting the rules." Alex kept their voice calm, almost gentle. "We're following the rules, Mrs. Hamilton. The cabin booking is legal and the number of guests here is well within limits. The gate simply ensures privacy and prevents unnecessary intrusion. You're welcome to observe from the driveway, but the property is private." Mrs. Hamilton's lips pressed into a thin line, and she leaned slightly forward, a move meant to intimidate. "Private? You can't decide what's private when it affects the community. Rules are rules. You will comply immediately or I will escalate this to the board." Alex straightened, meeting her glare without flinching. "We're complying according to the rules. If there's a concern, we can review the documentation together." Alex gestured to the stack of HOA guidelines on the cabin table, visible through the doorway. "Everything is here, and everything shows that your claims about guest limits are incorrect." For a moment, silence hung like a dense fog. Mrs. Hamilton's eyes narrowed as she scrutinized Alex. The air was tense, almost brittle, as though the slightest movement could shatter it. Then came a subtle shift. Alex saw a flicker of frustration in her expression, a crack in the armor she had worn to assert dominance. "You've documented everything?" she asked, voice quieter, almost disbelieving. "Yes," Alex replied. "We've kept records of your calls, letters, and emails. Every claim you've made about guest limits is accounted for and verified against the HOA rules. You're welcome to review them with us." Mrs. Hamilton's mouth opened as if to argue further, but no words came. Her hand twitched slightly, and Alex noticed her trying to maintain the image of control even as her power waned. She was used to compliance, to bending neighbors to her will with threats and exaggerations. But Alex had not faltered. Alex had remained calm, factual, and composed. Jamie stepped forward slightly, voice calm but firm. "We're not here to start trouble. We want to enjoy the weekend like everyone else, following the rules. If there's an issue, let's handle it properly according to the bylaws," Riley added. "The gate isn't aggressive. It's a boundary. Everyone respects boundaries, right?" Mrs. Hamilton took a step back, her carefully maintained composure cracking. She huffed and muttered something about reporting the incident. But Alex could see she was retreating, not defeated, but realizing that intimidation alone would not work here. The tension lingered for a moment longer before she finally turned, sunglasses slipping down her nose, voice low and clipped. "I'll be in touch," she said, almost as if she were issuing a threat, but it lacked the bite it once had. Alex closed the door slowly, feeling a surge of relief and satisfaction. The confrontation hadn't been explosive, but it had been decisive. Mrs. Hamilton had shown up expecting panic, submission, or at least visible fear, and Alex had given none of it. Instead, the calm, controlled, and factual stance had shifted the balance. For the first time since arriving, Alex allowed themselves to breathe fully. The cabin no longer felt like a battlefield, at least not entirely. They had faced the storm and stood firm. Outside, the lake shimmered, reflecting sunlight through the mist, a serene counterpoint to the tension that had just passed. Even so, Alex knew the weekend was far from over. Mrs. Hamilton's obsession and need to control might manifest in other ways, subtle or overt. But the confrontation had proven a critical point. Courage, calm, and preparation could neutralize even the most persistent intimidation. As the day unfolded, the three friends returned to their plans, hiking, fishing, and simply enjoying the cabin. But Alex remained vigilant, mindful of the lessons learned from yesterday and today. Every step outside, every glance at the driveway, reinforced a new understanding. Boundaries were worth defending, composure was a weapon, and manipulation could be countered with strategy rather than anger. By nightfall, the forest had settled into deep quiet. The stars reflected in the lake, and Alex sat on the balcony, coffee in hand, reflecting on the day's confrontation. They had faced Mrs. Hamilton directly and exposed the fragility behind her bluster. The victory was subtle, almost invisible to the casual observer, but it was a victory nonetheless, and as the wind whispered through the pine trees, Alex felt a strange mix of exhilaration and caution. The confrontation was over, for now, but the weekend promised more challenges. One thing was clear: this cabin, this retreat, was no longer just a place of solitude. It was a stage for testing courage, wit, and the power of standing firm when someone else tries to steal your peace. The next morning, the cabin was quiet, but Alex's mind buzzed with activity. The confrontation with Mrs. Hamilton had left a strange mix of relief and vigilance. She had backed down, at least temporarily, but Alex knew that her obsession with control wouldn't end there. If anything, it meant digging deeper. Understanding her patterns, her motives, and her previous overreaches was now essential. Alex started by reviewing past HOA communications online, searching for any references to Mrs. Hamilton. At first, it seemed like a maze of mundane notices, meeting agendas, and property updates. But then patterns began to emerge: repeated complaints from neighbors, odd disputes over minor infractions, and a persistent tendency to exaggerate the severity of issues. Jamie leaned over Alex's shoulder, reading aloud some entries. "Listen to this. Resident placed a decorative garden gnome incorrectly. HOA board notified. Violation pending." Alex chuckled softly. "She's been doing this for years. Overstepping, micromanaging, and creating conflict where none exists." Riley scrolled through more records, frowning. "Here's a thread where she tried to limit someone's barbecue to 10 people, and another where she threatened fines over a birthday party. She's consistent, always exaggerating numbers or rules to intimidate." A sense of vindication coursed through Alex. The absurdity of her claims about 100 guests suddenly made sense. It wasn't personal against Alex specifically. It was part of a long-standing pattern of manipulation. But understanding that pattern didn't make the situation any less tense. It merely offered a roadmap to handle it strategically. Alex's plan began to form. If Mrs. Hamilton thrived on intimidation, exposing the truth without confrontation would be the most satisfying response. Documentation would be key: emails, HOA rules, witness statements, and the absurdity of her claims could be used to reveal her overreach to neighbors, the board, or even publicly if necessary. By afternoon, Alex and his friends divided tasks. Jamie would organize all the communications and highlight contradictions. Riley would collect photographic evidence of the cabin's occupancy, confirming that only the legally booked guests were present. Alex would draft a concise record of events, emphasizing facts over emotion. Hours passed as the trio worked diligently, the cabin filled with quiet concentration. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, the lake shimmered in shifting sunlight, and somewhere in the distance, the forest seemed to watch silently. But inside, the sense of empowerment grew. Every piece of evidence gathered was a small victory, a tangible assertion of truth against manipulation. By early evening, Alex's investigation uncovered the most compelling revelation yet. Public HOA records revealed that Mrs. Hamilton had repeatedly filed complaints that were later dismissed, either because they were false, exaggerated, or simply unenforceable. One incident involved a resident who had hosted a small legal gathering, only to receive threats of fines and personal visits from Mrs. Hamilton. The record noted that the board had formally reprimanded her for overstepping authority. Alex read the entry aloud, voice tinged with disbelief and satisfaction. "She's done this multiple times, and each time she's overstepped, overreacted, and been caught." Jamie leaned back, a smile creeping across their face. "So the board knows about her obsession. That's good. That's powerful. It proves she's the problem, not the cabin owners," Riley added. "And now we have context. Her threats about 100 guests were not about us. They're part of a pattern. She's predictable, and we can use that." The revelation brought both relief and strategy. Alex knew that Mrs. Hamilton's obsession could no longer dictate the weekend. Instead, the power now rested with them. With proof in hand, any further attempts to intimidate could be countered decisively, and even exposed if necessary. That night, As darkness fell over the lake and stars reflected like scattered diamonds on the water, Alex felt a quiet determination settle in. The weekend had started as a peaceful retreat, spiraled into tension, and now had entered a phase of strategic empowerment. The key was patience and cleverness. Exposing Mrs. Hamilton's overreach would not come from anger or confrontation, but from carefully documented truth. Over coffee on the balcony, Alex reflected aloud. She thrives on fear, on uncertainty. But fear is only effective if it's accepted. If we stay calm, organized, and factual, she loses her control. Jamie nodded, tracing the rim of the mug thoughtfully. We've already won in a way. We've shown her that we're not intimidated, and now we have the evidence to prove her exaggerations. Riley leaned back, eyes on the stars. And when the neighbors see the truth, she can't manipulate them either. Her credibility is fragile, and we're holding the facts. Alex smiled, feeling a rare mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. The confrontation had been only the beginning. Now, with investigation and revelation on their side, the stage was set for the next phase, exposure. But the plan had to be clever, precise, and undeniable. Every action would matter. Every misstep could allow her to cling to her narrative. As the night deepened, Alex looked at the locked gate, the cabin, the lake, and the forest beyond. This weekend had transformed into a test of composure, strategy, and moral clarity. Mrs. Hamilton had underestimated them, and that mistake was now their leverage. The tension that had shadowed the cabin was shifting from anxiety to control, from fear to empowerment. Alex closed the laptop, taking a deep breath. The plan was ready. The evidence was gathered. The stage was set for exposure. Mrs. Hamilton's web of exaggeration and intimidation would soon unravel, not through conflict or rage, but through the undeniable clarity of truth. And as the night whispered around the cabin, Alex felt an almost cinematic satisfaction. This weekend was no longer about escape. It was about standing firm, documenting carefully, and preparing to reveal the reality that Mrs. Hamilton had tried so desperately to hide. The confrontation, investigation, and revelations had all led to this moment. The question now was simple: how best to expose the deception and ensure that justice, composure, and cleverness triumphed over manipulation. The morning sunlight glimmered on the lake, casting a golden hue across the cabin. Alex moved with purpose, their mind entirely focused on the plan that had been taking shape over the past 24 hours. Mrs. Hamilton's repeated exaggerations, threats, and intimidation had created tension. Yes, but now they provided an opportunity. The weekend wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about exposure, a clever, calculated revelation of truth. Alex gathered Jamie and Riley in the living room, spreading out all the evidence they had collected: emails, letters, photos, and printouts of the HOA rules. "Here's the plan," Alex began, voice calm and deliberate. "We're going to show Mrs. Hamilton and anyone else who doubts the truth exactly how her claims are unfounded. But it has to be undeniable, factual, documented, and impossible to twist." Jamie leaned over the evidence, nodding. "We've got everything. The official HOA rules, her letters and messages, and photos proving that only the legally booked guests are here. We just need to present it cleverly." Riley added, "We could create a visual display at the gate. If she shows up again, the evidence will be there in front of her, no discussion necessary." Alex smiled. "Exactly. The gate will act as both a barrier and a stage. Facts over fear. Documentation over manipulation. Let's make it clear that attempts to intimidate will fail." The afternoon passed as the friends prepared. Jamie organized the printed letters and emails into a neat binder, while Riley created clear, labeled photo evidence of the cabin occupancy and guest count. Alex drafted a concise statement, highlighting the discrepancies in Mrs. Hamilton's claims and emphasizing adherence to HOA rules. Everything was precise, factual, and visually compelling. By late afternoon, the gate had become more than a physical barrier. It was now a statement. A small sign displayed in neat letters: Cabin occupancy is legal and within HOA guidelines. All communications documented. The binder of evidence was visible through the gate, stacked carefully on a small table. The photos, letters, and printed rules were all on display. It was impossible to ignore, impossible to argue with, and impossible to twist. Alex stepped back, surveying their work. There was a thrill in the precision, a satisfaction in the quiet brilliance of the plan. Mrs. Hamilton thrived on exaggeration and intimidation, but here truth stood boldly, unmoved by her theatrics. Sure enough, by early evening the inevitable occurred. The familiar silhouette appeared at the driveway. Mrs. Hamilton approached, sunglasses on, lips pressed into that familiar thin line, and her posture radiating authority. But as her eyes fell on the evidence at the gate, the first flicker of doubt crossed her face. "Alex, what is this?" she demanded, voice tense. Alex stepped forward calmly. "This is the documentation of all communications, bookings, and rules about this cabin. Everything you've claimed about guest limits has been carefully verified. You're welcome to review it, Mrs. Hamilton." Mrs. Hamilton's gaze darted over the binder, the printed rules, and the photographs. Her hands twitched at her sides. She opened her mouth, closed it, and looked as though she was searching for a way to regain control. But the facts were undeniable. Every exaggeration, every false claim, every threat, laid out neatly, visibly, irrefutably. Jamie added, "We've stayed calm, followed the rules, and documented everything." "This is just the reality of the situation," Riley nodded. "There's nothing to argue. The truth is clear." Mrs. Hamilton's composure faltered, a rare crack appearing in her armor. She took a step back, adjusting her sunglasses nervously. This doesn't change the rules," she muttered. Alex shook their head gently. "It doesn't need to. It just clarifies them. The cabin booking is legal. Guest numbers are accurate, and this is visible for anyone who might doubt it." The effect was immediate. Her threats and intimidation held no power here. The evidence removed her leverage entirely. She had relied on fear and exaggeration, but the truth was unassailable. After a tense pause, Mrs. Hamilton huffed and turned, muttering about contacting the board. But it was clear that her credibility, even with neighbors who might have sympathized, had been shaken. The three friends exhaled, a collective release of tension. The plan had worked. Not through anger, not through shouting, but through careful, strategic exposure. The gate wasn't just a physical barrier. It had become a stage for the undeniable truth, and Alex had orchestrated it perfectly. As night fell and the forest quieted, Alex reflected on the sequence of events. The weekend had begun as a peaceful retreat, escalated into anxiety and confrontation, and had now become a showcase of strategy, courage, and composure. Mrs. Hamilton's obsession had been her weakness. Alex's calm, meticulous approach had turned it into a triumph. They sat on the balcony, watching the moonlight shimmer across the lake, feeling a sense of satisfaction deeper than simple victory. The cabin was no longer just a getaway, it was a symbol of standing firm, of using evidence and calm reasoning against intimidation, and of reclaiming peace through intelligence rather than aggression. Jamie smiled, nudging Alex gently. "You didn't just win. You exposed the truth without losing your cool." "That's impressive," Riley added. "And now she knows she can't bully anyone here." "It's over," Alex nodded. "It's more than over. It's a lesson. Truth and composure will always outlast fear and exaggeration." As the stars reflected in the lake, Alex felt a quiet, profound satisfaction. The weekend had tested patience, courage, and strategy, but it had also proven that calm intelligence, careful planning, and adherence to facts could overcome even the most persistent attempts at intimidation. The gate remained locked, the evidence displayed, and the cabin finally felt like what it had been meant to be. A place of peace, reclaimed not by confrontation or anger, but by cleverness, composure, and the power of truth. And in the stillness of the forest, Alex understood one thing clearly. Sometimes, exposing a person's manipulation doesn't require fury. It requires foresight, patience, and the quiet certainty of knowing the truth will always speak louder than threats. The following morning, the cabin was bathed in soft golden light, a stark contrast to the tension-filled days prior. Alex stepped out onto the balcony, inhaling the crisp air. The lake shimmered, mirroring the sky in tranquil blues and silvers. For the first time that weekend, there was a true sense of peace, earned, hard-won, and profoundly satisfying. The previous day's confrontation and strategic exposure had set everything right. Mrs. Hamilton's credibility had been quietly but undeniably undermined, and the evidence displayed at the gate had left no room for misinterpretation. The HOA could no longer rely on her exaggerations to intimidate anyone, and Alex, Jamie, and Riley had successfully reclaimed their space without aggression, without hostility, only with calm intelligence and documentation. As the three friends prepared breakfast, Alex reflected on how drastically the weekend had changed. What had started as a simple retreat from city life had transformed into a test of patience, composure, and strategic thinking. Every step, the letters, the phone calls, the locked gate, the confrontation, and finally the public evidence, had been a lesson in courage and careful planning. Jamie poured coffee into mugs, smiling. "You know, it's almost funny. The weekend was supposed to be relaxing, and instead it became a masterclass in standing up to manipulation." Alex chuckled softly. "Funny, maybe, but I'll take this lesson any day. I've realized something important. Boundaries are everything. Once you know them and defend them wisely, nothing, no intimidation, no exaggeration, can take them away." Riley added thoughtfully, "And it's not just about defending your space. It's about composure, clarity, and strategy. Anyone can get angry or retaliate, but what you did, it was controlled, smart, and undeniable." "That's powerful," Alex nodded, staring out at the lake. "Powerful and peaceful. The funny thing is, the cabin didn't change. It was the same quiet lake, the same trees, the same comfort. It just felt different once we reclaimed it. That's the lesson here. Peace isn't found. It's defended." They spent the morning hiking the trails around the cabin, the crisp forest air filling their lungs, and the sound of rustling leaves creating a natural soundtrack. Every step was lighter, freer, as if the tension from the past days had been absorbed into the ground beneath their feet. The cabin, the lake, and the forest had returned to their intended serenity, but now it was richer, layered with the satisfaction of triumph over manipulation. At one point, Alex paused at a clearing overlooking the lake. The water reflected the sunlight like scattered glass, and the forest seemed almost to exhale in quiet approval. "It's funny," Alex said softly, "how someone else's obsession with control can teach you so much about your own strength." Mrs. Hamilton tried to steal peace with exaggeration and intimidation, but all she did was show us how to defend it with intelligence. "Calm and preparation," Jamie smiled, eyes tracing the horizon. "And you did it without losing your cool. That's something most people can't manage," Riley added. "It's also a reminder fear is only effective if you accept it. You didn't. You stood firm, and that's why it worked." As they returned to the cabin, Alex felt a sense of closure settle in. The gate remained locked, a symbol of their boundaries. The evidence had been displayed, a testament to careful planning, and the cabin finally was a sanctuary again. Every moment of stress, fear, and tension had led to this: clarity, victory, and peace. Later, as the sun began to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows over the lake, Alex sat alone for a moment, reflecting. The weekend had been more than just a getaway. It had been an education in courage, strategy, and the quiet power of truth. Mrs. Hamilton's obsession, which had once felt overwhelming, now seemed almost small, exposed and powerless against calm intelligence. Alex smiled softly and whispered, almost to themselves, "Sometimes the smallest gate can hold the biggest truths. Sometimes the quietest defense can have the loudest impact. And sometimes peace isn't found, it's reclaimed." In the stillness of the forest, the lake reflecting the final glow of sunset, Alex realized that the lessons of the weekend would stay with them long after the cabin was packed up. Boundaries were essential. Calm composure was powerful. Truth, when documented and strategically presented, could overcome manipulation, exaggeration, and fear. As night fell, stars glittering above the lake, Alex made one final note in their journal. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the wisdom to act despite it. Peace is not given. It is claimed and defended. And in that moment, surrounded by nature and the quiet aftermath of victory, the cabin truly felt like a haven. The forest whispered, the water gleamed, and the three friends, now united by experience and triumph, knew they had reclaimed not just a weekend, but a sense of control, clarity, and enduring peace. For Alex, the story of Mrs. Hamilton was no longer about conflict. It was about empowerment, the quiet strength of composure and the undeniable force of truth. The takeaway was simple but profound. Even in the face of intimidation, one could reclaim peace with cleverness, preparation, and courage. The question lingered in the still night air, gentle but insistent. When someone tries to steal your peace, how will you respond? Will you let fear dictate your actions, or will you stand firm, armed with truth and calm resolve? And with that, the weekend drew to a close, not with anger or defeat, but with clarity, empowerment, and a sense of peace hard-earned and fully deserved.